right. I think we got the technicalities figured out here. Well, thank you everyone for hopping in and joining Redefining Vulnerability Management for the new year. So we had some plans to kick this off at the new year, but as end of years go, got a little busy, right guys?
Yep,
Just
how
a
it
little bit.
goes.
Yeah, and Larry, you got to join in with this postponing. You're new to the Cavelo team, so we'll have to introduce you a little bit more. I'm really excited to hear how that's going.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.
But just like the webinar kind of described, the goal here is really to talk a little bit about entrepreneurship, but also kind of tie in how Senteon and Cavelo met through the entrepreneurship program Pitch It, and how that enabled us to share different perspectives and really outline how both of our respective visions were able to align and potentially create some type of coexisting opportunity for partners to better understand how the products work together instead of against each other, right? So really excited to dive into that, but let's just kick off with introductions. So James, you mind kicking us off here?
Sure, Zach. Thank you. I'm excited to be here. So my name is James McNacka. I am the CEO of Cavelo. I'm certainly excited to be having this conversation.
Awesome. I got to sit in on your IT Nation last year. You did a panel just on entrepreneurship for an hour, so I know you got plenty of stories.
I've got the war wounds. I think anyone who does this multiple times needs to be a little crazy. But I'm just fortunate to have such a good team around me that can support me and drive the business forward.
I know, talking in the pre-show, I was impressed. I didn't realize you guys had a physical office, so that is very exciting, and you don't hear about it all the time with all their remote culture.
I'm a little old school, Zach. I still call my phone a cell phone, and I prefer people calling me and texting me, and I certainly like to have face-to-face conversations. Even that's why I go to events, right? I think that there's something to be said about a handshake and looking someone in the eyes and saying, yes, we're going to do this. So when it comes to a startup company, especially at the very start, I think with working with engineers, it's just sometimes easier to be in the same room and collaborate.
Yeah, definitely I've seen that. And you did a hand motion. I think it was this. Isn't the phone motion this? I was confused by that.
Oh, I don't know. I'm Italian. I just use my hands like this.
I was laughing. I saw it on elementary schoolers were asked how to show you're picking up the phone, and it's now this motion instead of. Anyway, it was a bad joke. And Larry, we also met through the Pitch It program. You were representing another company at the time, but looking at your background, you've really seemed like you've embraced the startup early stage culture, and you've been at a few environments of the sort. Is that accurate?
That is accurate. I've been in the channel a long time. We'll just call it that, 20 plus years. And, it's funny. These days, people stop me. They're like, oh, my God, you've gone somewhere else. You've switched again. People seem to forget I spent 17 years at one organization, and that was CNET Content Solutions. But yeah, over the past 5 or 6 years, yeah, I've kind of jumped around just a little bit, only because the opportunities presented themselves for me to kind of join, as you just kind of pointed out, some of these startup organizations. And I played in the Pitch It program, ConnectWise, and Sean Lardo does a heck of a job of hosting it. But I did it one year with DataStream, and then I went from DataStream to Infima. So last year I competed against both Cavelo and Senteon when I was with Infima. And now, as of January 20th of this year, I've joined the Cavelo team and loving every minute of it.
So you leverage Pitch It to find the next role? Is that what I put together there?
Not necessarily, but sometimes things just work out that way.
That is awesome. And I definitely want to dive into that because myself, I am a first-time entrepreneur. So this is honestly a very interesting lineup. We have James, more of the serial entrepreneur style, myself being my first rodeo, even though it feels like 3 lifetimes. and then yourself, who you've seen multiple startup cultures where you are. I guess for the audience, Larry, where do you usually come in? Like top 10, top 20 employee? Like, in a perfect world, where do you think you'd fit?
Yeah, with most of the startups that I've joined, I've been probably one of the first 10 employees. With Cavelo, I'm one of the first, what, 30 employees? So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
I'm a little further down the list at Cavelo, but with the others, I think I was employee number three at one, employee number five at one. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, myself, for those who don't know, first time entrepreneur over at Senteon, and really came to me through wanting to join the cybersecurity world and honestly do software sales and go to market. But my, I guess, path here isn't always traditional as most entrepreneurs, to where I didn't necessarily have a technical background. I was never an engineer or an admin. So me trying to pick up a company that focuses on settings and cybersecurity was something a little overwhelming at the start, and we'll talk a little bit about the settings and vulnerabilities and all of those tie-ins for the audience. But it took a lot for, I guess, myself to figure out where my best fit is, how to break into not just earning respect as a first-time entrepreneur, but also that earning that respect as a first-time cybersecurity, SME or professional, if you will. So very awesome to hear all the lineup.
Well, Zach, just from my perspective, you've done an awesome job, and congratulations on winning the Pitch It last year.
Got the check out for the webinar, right?
Yeah. So,
I appreciate it. It was that was my second time, I think, talking on a stage. So that was pretty overwhelming to be in front of 800 people, I think, were in the audience, and bringing out the construction hats and the neon vests was
it
it was
it wasn't
entertaining.
you came across as very polished, and it wasn't the rap that we did or AK-47 did. However, I would say, yeah, you did a great job.
Appreciate it. Well, let's dive into a little bit more on the company side and kick off with the first slide on entrepreneurship. So, we all are in different ventures. Larry, you've seen a few. Senteon is focusing on remediation. Cavelo has taken a new approach, which I'm excited to really dive into. But let's talk about what sparked the innovation for you, James, right? Did you start as an engineer? Were you dealing with CVEs, vulnerabilities? You in Pitch It, your whole effort was redefining the vulnerability management space. Tell
Sure.
us what that means and where this started.
So I started off on the technology side, and I would like to say that I am not as technical now as I probably think I am. However, my story is pretty interesting, I guess. I was in the cybersecurity space for most of my career in the startup world, and then I ended up acquiring my own MSP. And I grew that business. I tripled the revenue, and I ended up bringing some engineers on to help build a vulnerability management product. And the reason why I did that was because of the fact that there was really no other solution out there. And so building out that product, I realized other MSPs wanted to buy that product. So we ended up opportunistically, I sold the MSP business, spun out the vulnerability management business, and then 9 months later partnered with a company called Arctic Wolf. And then they ended up acquiring us and taking us out. And so a year after that, I was bored, and I'm like, I need to. I had like 5 different ideas, and they were in different spaces like healthcare. I decided that I really enjoy the channel, and so I wanted to stay there, and I wanted to build a platform to help MSPs have MSSP like offerings, and that's what we've done.
That's awesome. So this really, I guess, came from necessity, right? With the first gig, and I saw a path to, I guess, create a SaaS offering instead of trying to manage service providers like a MSSP or something along those
Yeah.
lines. You actually saw an opportunity to launch something they can manage and use themselves. Is that correct?
Yeah, so I think what I started to see in the market was twofold. There's regulatory compliance that's coming out and demanding that the end customer do kind of the best practice type things like vulnerability management, data discovery, classification, configuration management, all that stuff. And with GDPR, it was probably the first regulatory compliance where it had teeth. People were getting fined. And so folks are looking at regulatory compliance and actually doing something like the SEC in finance, et cetera, et cetera. And so then if you look at the fact that it's really hard to hire folks on the compliance side and cybersecurity side, the MSPs ecosystem is maturing. There's a lot of acquisitions. So effectively there's larger MSPs. So the difference between an MSP just focused on small, medium, I started to notice the market was opening up and there were larger MSPs out there. And so I wanted to ride that wave, both on the compliance side and on the fact that the market's leveling up. And so that's exactly what we did. We built a platform, and we're super excited. You know, we believe in that ecosystem.
That's awesome to hear. Yeah, and it's funny seeing the writing on the wall. Like, it's not like you set out necessarily to launch another company, right? You had that year post your first acquisition, and you were like, you could have stayed back, but it's something about the drive and wanting to, do it better the second time. What would you change? And I've already seen that through the pivots we've made at Senteon.
Yeah, I would say you become unemployable at some point.
I hate it, but it's true.
Yeah. The only thing I would say is there is this weird, you think it's going to be easier the second or third time, and it's not. It's still very much a grind. You got to roll up your sleeves. There's always challenging moments, and certainly I think what happens is you can start to predict certain things where it's like you've been through it. Where the first time it's like going through a tunnel. You don't know what the end of the tunnel looks like. Where now you can predict, but there's still challenges along the way. It's definitely still a difficult grind.
I know from my perspective, when I first heard of what Senteon was doing, right, we made a lot of pivots, but at some point we said, hey, what if we're able to actually make corrections? We started to see that when we did market research calls, we said, hey, what are you looking for? And people said they didn't have enough time to actually fix all the things they know about. And I think that's something me and you both have very much in common. We're trying to better prioritize time or provide more automation so that you know what can get done. The low-hanging, high-value fruit. So we'll dive into that here in upcoming in the presentation. But Larry, I'm curious to toss this in your court, add some color to the webinar, as you said, your goal is. You've seen multiple entrepreneurs and you've interacted with plenty. Is there any common theme of a good entrepreneur or something you've just seen overall that you really made you want to join James or made you want to join all the previous companies?
Yeah, that's a great question, Zach. And perhaps the answer I'm going to give may not be what you're looking for, but to me, it's
Wow,
it's
James is on
culture.
the call.
No, it really is. James and I've talked about this. It's culture. It's finding a place that you fit into as well as complement and vice versa. And one of the things that James has done with Cavelo, and look, hey, he's cheating. He's done this before. So he learned along the way. But you definitely kind of got to follow this crawl, walk, run type strategy. As the child grows, with the child being your business, you don't want to do things too quickly. And I've seen some of the startups I've worked for do things maybe a little too quick, jumping into some stuff without really knowing what they were jumping into. Um, and then having to kind of quickly retreat from that. So, yeah, I think James has had some experience doing this. He's done it in a smart way. And the culture, again, that is just huge, at least for me. I mean, obviously, I'm a little bit older than you two. So, it's a different
No,
generation. Just a little bit, you know. Actually, I'm 30. You know, I started when I was 29. This is what the channel does to you. It, you know, gives you gray hair real fast.
Shit, I got
Um,
one more year until I look like you.
but yeah, you know, culture is a really good thing. And you know, the other thing, kind of maybe expanding on this just a little bit, especially for you, Zach,
Mhm.
is you know, once you get things going, you're maybe out of that crawl stage, you're kind of walking. To me, it becomes really beneficial for a company to do exactly what James did with me. You know, he took somebody that's been in the industry for quite some time, that is fairly well known,
Yep.
different things like that. And I think it serves to help both of us. You know, it gives me fresh blood to kind of push a new platform and a new company, new innovation, different things like that. And then they also, I think, get to capitalize on the fact that I've been doing this for a long time, and people know who I am. So, you know, for startups that or entrepreneurs that may be thinking about starting up a company, you know, I think, you know, once you get to that walk stage, finding somebody that has been doing this for some time to kind of just, you know, help guide you along, or, you know, just vet things out for you, just to kind of, you know, make sure that your thoughts line up with what should work within the channel.
Yeah, and I'll emphasize that point one more time. You know, we did get to all run into and hang out at Rite of Boom a few months ago. My God, it felt like a few months, but I guess
A
it was
couple of
just
weeks
last
ago.
month. Enough has happened in just the last month. But you guys all had your team dinner, right? I got to see you in the cafe and whatnot. So, no, very much admire what you're building over there, James, and glad to hear Larry's live testimonial over there. So, a lot to admire. Um, I guess to kind of wrap up the I guess slide here, right? We want to get to the tech, we want to get to the modern business, but something I personally have seen as we do grow and scale servicing managed service providers is they don't they always understand how an MSP needs to scale, how an MSP makes money, right? That's how their business works. But there's kind of like, and maybe you'll disagree with me, but there's kind of like this shadow on vendors where it's not always understood how does the vendor scale appropriately to service MSPs at scale. How can we still have enough margin to influence our roadmap, meet delivery times while still servicing a market that has to resell our technology? So kind of wrapping up the lessons and challenges and hitting that scaling phase, right, James? You're hitting almost 3 dozen employees, ourselves a little over a dozen. What have you really identified as key things learned as you're trying to scale a SaaS offering into the MSP audience?
Yeah, actually, I'd say you touched on it. You know, the if you look at the ICP or the addressable market of an MSP, there's let's call it 40,000 MSPs out there in North America. Let's say there's 25,000 smaller, and then there's the mature MSPs that are the difference. The mature MSPs already have a service offering, so it's for us it was rip and replace, and because our product's very mature, you know, it goes against enterprise grade tools. We naturally just fit there. As we go down market, which is definitely part of our go to market, one of the things that we had to do a better job of, and we continue to do, is how do we enable the smaller MSPs to effectively go to market with Cavelo? Because really, they're taking the product and turning it into a service, which gives them more revenue. But sounds great. How do they sell it, right? And so, you know, I think that is always a challenge, and certainly it's something that, you know, we continually evolve. But we created our own community. The team did an amazing job of, you know, we have a community that we just share. Like, you know, it's as simple as how do you do campaigns, right? We have an awesome marketing team that does a great job. Let's share the wealth. Like, let's show our community how, you know, how to go to market with our product. And when we were originally building the product, I never thought that would be such a big hurdle for us, but I think it's in the channel. It's just something that's natural and something that we just needed to understand, and we're just evolving and
You know,
continually
you
working
maybe
on.
already had this, but a trend I've been seeing is, you know, we can give shout out to Ninja, I think Roost as well, but hiring a
Yes.
full time community manager, right? Keeping
Yeah.
up with these forums and the want to be hand in hand with their vendor partners, right? Their partners in this industry. Well, my background coming from enterprise sales, I'd sell a project, we'd implement the project, and then we'd follow up in 2-3 years when that project needed an update, right? There wasn't a ton of, hey, I want you to develop like this. This would help me this way, right? So are you finding a need for a full-time community person? Do you already have one? Are you seeing that trend as well?
Yeah, we don't have a dedicated one right now, but certainly something we'd probably do next year. I mean, the team is just really good at multitasking, and I think I don't know if it's one person either. Like I think it's it can be multiple stakeholders in the organization to talk about what it is that they're good at. But certainly community-led growth is something that's new. You talked about Roost and Ninja One. It's something that's new and very important. Something that we're learning as we go, and we'll just continue. We'll
Yeah,
continue.
I think just
Yeah, and if
I
I can
echo.
throw something in there, sorry about that, Zach. Didn't
You're
mean to
good.
talk over top of you, but talking about the community, all that good stuff. Look, the channel is a relationship-based business, and you talk about scaling and growing. You're not going to scale and grow if you don't involve your partners, if you don't talk to those partners, and most importantly, listen to those partners.
Yeah.
So, from, to talking to two entrepreneurs here, who understand it, those that are just starting out, different things like that, highly encourage you to put together a partner advisory council, PAC for short, like a bunch of us call it, because your partners want to see you succeed. They like what you're doing, they want to see you succeed, and they want to have a hand in your success. So engage them and listen to them and build that community through the partners that you've got, and they're going to refer you to others and so on and so forth.
Yep, I can't emphasize that enough. That's something we definitely didn't do too early on. We did. It's something we've started to prioritize now. So, oh, my cat's tail. Come on, buddy. Oh, he's
So
always hopping in the
so
camera, man. My keyboard double clicks now. I need to get a cover. All of his fur is just sitting on the inside. It's horrible. But that is one thing that Senteon didn't necessarily take advantage of too early in the process. And honestly, the entrepreneurs listen as we wrap up this kind of topic, entrepreneurship. Definitely try to find people you think will actually be buyers early on. Even if they're not buyers that day, there's someone, and when I say buyers, what I
Mm-hmm.
should say is users. Make sure it's someone who's actually going to have their hands on the tool, or someone's going to interact with the reports that are output of that tool, right? It's important to have both those pieces as you're building, because I think there are quite a few priority, if only I had Cavelo for my roadmap to better priority, which features would actually get the return on investment. And that's one thing I find partner advisory boards would be very helpful. So that is something we're actively putting together and working on right now.
Yeah, and you just hit on something huge, and that is when you're talking to folks out there, they may not be ready to buy today.
Yep.
They may not be ready to buy tomorrow or next week. But if you plant the seed when the time is right, it might be 6 months, it might be a year, it might be 18 months later. They all of a sudden come back and say, hey, it's time to talk. So you've got to plant those seeds and just not expect that instantaneous, everybody's going to drop everything. Hey, I want to buy your product.
It's funny, and James, I don't know if you
Whoop.
can echo this sentiment, but there's partners that we have today that I had met with over 2 years ago. Did my best to keep them up to date, newsletters, subscriptions, and whatnot, but not a ton of outreach. And 2 years later, the product hit the point they were looking for 2 years ago, and without being associated, without being on a board, they reached back out and said, "Hey, like, I want back in." Like, have you ever had like a 2+ year sales cycle where you were just like didn't expect to
yep.
ever hear from you again?
Yep. It's interesting. Larry touched on this, but I'll go at it a different way. What we do is we make our partners part of the journey.
Mhm.
So we carve off 30% of our roadmap for customer feedback. I've always freed up Friday morning for customer conversations, just listening to the customer. And so what I find is people are compelled to help more,
Mhm.
and people are more compelled to be come back later on when you have a feature. I mean, a lot of times the early days, we would have conditional POs on a feature that we're building. And so, I think there's always this trust piece, but once you deliver and folks know that you mean what you say, the things start to really change. You get referral-based selling too.
That's really cool. All right, let's start to talk a little bit more about where our actual innovations come from. So, when we met in Pitch It, when I literally watched your pitch, it was like, hey, we're redefining the vulnerability management. I think your team, Chris and Alex, both hosted, and they literally said vulnerability management today is broken. That's a hell of a statement. But I also kicked off my pitch taking advantage of you guys. I was like, hey, I also think it's broken, right? Because there's so much to improve. And the first point I want to hear is just noise versus insight. So this is a little bit of where Senteon and Cavelo more complement each other and are a little bit different in our respects. So to give the Senteon point of view here, we're 100% aligning to best practice frameworks, existing settings, existing things that are built into the system to where we're getting assets, whether it's a hardware asset, a software asset, we're getting that configured for best practice. And then your side, I do think, encompasses some of that where you can view it, but there's a little bit more of a prioritization schedule, while Senteon's more of a learning mode, change as much as possible, 500 things at once, while you're presenting more of a prioritized approach, encompassing a lot more from that level. Is that correct?
Yeah, I like to say, traditionally speaking, just looking at vulnerabilities is a one-dimensional view into your risk. And so think of it like this: there's 60,000 vulnerabilities out there. Folks don't patch everything. You can't just blindly patch, right? Because you know what happens when you do that. You have to look at things in a multi-dimensional view, and that's exactly what we give our customers, and that basically cuts through the noise and gives the priority of remediation based off of where your risk really lies. And so what we do is we say, certainly, vulnerabilities is part of it. Configuration management, you talked about, is another part. Data discovery, understanding your attack surface is another one. So if you have your CFO who has access to all this sensitive data, and vulnerabilities are known on that laptop, then that's a higher priority than someone who doesn't have any sensitive data, because at the end of the day, what are you trying to do? You're trying to prevent a data breach from happening, right? That's the badness you're trying to prevent. So that's that multi-dimensional view into your threat landscape. And I like to think of it like, if you think about vulnerability management, it's kind of a misleading title, because vulnerabilities can be across the board. It can be configuration. It could just be the fact that, asset discovery. And so, what we try to do is kind of have that platform and it's not necessarily, each function or module, it's the telemetry information that the platform collects to be able to actually tell you where's your real risk in your organization and what do you need to do to try to mitigate that risk. And so that's kind of the approach that we've taken.
Well, that sounds like a very human process, or at least before Cavelo maybe, is where you're trying to understand the overall risk posture, risk acceptance going on, something new is introduced. That prioritization piece sounds like the biggest differentiator, and maybe I'm wrong here, but is that an automated piece? Are there a human at Cavelo, or is that the user of Cavelo to determine or can customize even? Like, how do you determine risk prioritization?
So there's always going to be a human involved to a certain degree. What we try to do is automate it based off of so our platform is multi-tenant, and there's a policy engine where you can create policies that say, for example, tenant ABC, they said that there shouldn't be any credit card information on any of the machines. So when credit card information gets found, it can create a ticket in the MSP's PSA or ticketing system, and then they can triage it, right? Basically, what we're trying to do is cut through the manual copy paste and allow the MSP to focus on the high touch stuff. And so our continuous roadmap is that automation piece and through that policy engine. We feel like integrating into the PSA will allows us to be part of that tech stack. And it's not just about reporting. It's about the whole triaging piece. It's about actually doing something. And so you think about penetration tests traditionally in the last, 10 years, that was what cybersecurity was. You get a penetration test.
I don't
No
need
one would do
security. I
anything with
just
it.
need to know if I can pass a pen test. I just need a
Yeah,
pen
so
test
it
to
would
have.
be check the box, check the box, but it's not hardening your environment. It's not doing anything. It's collecting dust. And so we don't want to, yeah, we deliver all the reports to be able to check the box, but at the end of the day, we truly want to be part of the tech stack, the quarterly reviews in order to lower the risk of our MSP customers and give them all the stuff that they need to be able to go to compliance and cybersecurity insurance renewals, all that good stuff.
Yep. And just to kind of emphasize for the audience, because this is something I hear all the time. Oh, Senteon's going to replace my vulnerability scanning tool or vulnerability management, whatever you want. And the point here I really want to emphasize, especially from Cavelo's unique point of view, is you're positioning as a MSP to end client partnership tool almost. You even mentioned quarterly reviews. Like you're showing that improvement and have a heavy aspect of reporting, but there's a lot more input and prioritization to it, while Senteon kind of feeds into what a Cavelo would do, where our recommendations come directly from a framework, and maybe you can talk towards that as well if there's a framework aspect of Cavelo. But our recommendations come directly from CIS, NIST hardening recommendations on the protect layer, GTIA Trustmark recommendations. Don't put that on the live webinar. I'll get exiled. But where our remediations that are already existing, they're not necessarily new unless we have something like a print nightmare from a few years ago or a new NTLM, right? Ours are more existing vulnerabilities, if you will. I think the appropriate term is more exposures because they're just built into the device or built into the application. We're fixing it because they exist no matter what. You have X, you must do Y. And then the results of our hardening would you say, improve the results of a vulnerability scanning or a Cavelo tool? They would eliminate a lot of those red marks. Is that the right relationship to present?
100%. So here's what I love about what you guys do. Again, it's like the high touch. At the end of the day, MSPs they're smart folks, but their job is not to copy paste, check configuration and all the endpoints. They want to automate and then have it just for the sake of what you just said, just auto remediate. And so, certainly there's different, ways that you can do that. But I look at, configuration management, misconfiguration, CIS benchmark as that's how you find vulnerabilities in the cloud, right? And so that's how you find that's where things get interesting on-prem too, right?
Yep.
It's like if you think about multi-factor not being enabled, all the best practices, and then you overlay regulatory compliance, that's the real meat. That's the actual, are you doing to actually remediate? And I think that's where there's, it's kind of where the tire hits the road in the sense of like doing something about lowering your risk. And I think there's the synergy that we have it's just huge.
Yeah, and we appreciate, again, the pitch, it really brought us together. So having partners like yourself and the industry, this, again, I always want to try to shed as many layers from vendor perspective as much as possible because MSPs want to know what's behind the curtain. And, I would say I'm seeing a trend where I am communicating with more and more vendors. We're better aligning. We're doing webinars. We're doing joint case studies. So that's a really cool trend. Larry, I want to toss it to you. You've sold a variety of new early stage software, whatever that is. James hinted on this, presenting to the CFO and creating it. Tell us a little bit about, your strategy, because there's a business disconnect. I primarily sell to the CISO, the engineers, and the admins. James sounds like he is a little bit more well-rounded, but you've done it. Multiple different value props, multiple different buyers. Tell us how the business overall connects, or maybe the disconnect with the cybersecurity offerings you've worked with.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that I see out there is vendors are so focused on selling to the MSP, but they're not teaching the MSP how to sell it to their customer and how to position it to their customer and what's the value in it for their customer. What is it going to do for them? Many vendors are just so focused on just talking right to that MSP and saying, "Hey, this is the greatest thing since sliced bread." And then once the MSP agrees and buys that loaf of bread, then they're going, "What the hell do I do now? How do I sell this?" And there's so many that just don't support that. So I think it's, critical. I don't care whether you're dealing with the owner of a company or the director of technology or whomever it may be. You've got to be able to communicate with them. You've got to listen more than anything else, and just find what are the pain points they're talking about, and how does my platform answer some of the pain points that they're having, and then how do I take it a step further and really listen to what it is that they're trying to solve for their customers, so that I can kind of help guide them through the journey and help coach them. Because, look, at the end of the day, you may be the best salesperson in the world and you sell it to the MSP, but if they can't go and sell it to their customers, guess what? You got a short-term sale.
Yep.
And none of us want a short-term sale. We want to build partners for life or for a long time. So yeah, hopefully that kind of sheds, just a little bit different perspective on
It
it.
it does, and honestly, let's pull up the next slide because I tossed, or rather, we tossed when we were making this how we tackle the gaps, and I did have a technical mindset when we got to this point. But Larry, you kind of called out something a little bit like what's the vendor business gap, and a lot of vendors out there don't consider the second half you just introduced, and you introduced very well. I'll add to that, but that's something we also noticed when we were early on. We would make selling to the MSP for us wasn't that hard. The MSP wanted to make Cavelo's red reports. They wanted to turn them green. Senteon's a great medium to get that done. But there was a gap between our vendor process, our MSP to the end client, of them not necessarily feeling the urgency or the prioritization of taking what they did internally externally or trying to monetize it even. So that was a very good call out because I literally had this slide coming up and I was just like, oh, that's a better perspective than when we made this.
Nice segue, huh?
Yeah. So tell us, and James, maybe you want to respond a little bit to Larry there, but how does that layer? It sounds like you guys have better articulated it even better than Senteon. I know we've made some moves to include additional professional services. I've done MSP to end client presentations. It's something we're now getting exposed to more and more since we've hit a certain level of scale. But how does that aspect of Larry introduced influence your roadmap or influence the way Cavelo is designed? Like, what is the future of vendors in the MSP market, if you will?
I think for us, it's ease of use. If you think about traditionally speaking, tools, and we're not a tool, we're a platform. Tools are very clunky and hard to use. So, it's a continuous effort for us to make sure that we're always keeping the customers in mind when it comes to that ease of use piece. I find like people don't necessarily pick up a manual and read it anymore. So we tend to do more live sessions. We are working with our partners to understand how the different ways that they're selling it and providing like a playbook to our MSPs.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting, and I mean, Zach, you know this, MSPs actually want to help each other out. Like there is
Mm-hmm.
absolutely, that ecosystem. And so the part of the community is understanding what some people are using our product for to make them successful. And there's different use cases where, when we first started the product, we didn't necessarily care about the use cases. And now we can hone in on it and we could start to make changes in the product that are, what I would argue, smaller changes, but are very effective.
Yep.
And so, we built out the product, its breadth and depth, and now it's all about what I like to say is like just, sanding down the edges, right? And so I think that's a very important stage for us.
Yeah, I very much agree, and it's always funny doing these live webinars because these are live. I when we made this, did not expect this direction, but it's cool to see that again, shedding the layers off the vendor perspective. The right ones are building platforms that they want the input, they want the people to actually be involved. So I love that we both see that and just kind of had our relationship from Pitch It and so forth. I guess diving into a little bit on the technical side, I mentioned heavily like Senteon is framework driven. We're assisting with meeting frameworks. Are you guys aligning to any framework? Like, do you see any writing on the wall where compliance is going to become security? Insurance will become security. Are we a year away, 5 years away? They're completely two different things and they'll never align type of thing?
So I think it's important to
Smirk
understand the
there
difference.
entertained me as well.
I, I think it's important for us to differentiate what we don't do. And so we don't necessarily do compliance per se. However, our product, from an audit perspective, that data is used to check the box for vulnerability management, data discovery, all that stuff. Like, if you think about data discovery and who has access to the data, I would argue, the SEC now has this. Every regulatory compliance act is heading towards that direction where it's like, you got to understand where your data is. You got to understand your data hygiene. And so we are overlaying regulatory compliance in what we do in the modules. So we are doing that today. And it's basically, again, it's that ease of use. I think that, if you actually take the effort to read, NIST, SEC, there's a lot of similarities, right? But they're specific for a vertical, and you're never going to get away from that. And so we absolutely are aligned to that. I think I'll just throw this out. The one interesting one is CMMC, and that's one that's on our roadmap from a regulatory compliance, like us being compliant. We can detect CUI information, and I think that that's the one body that will just be widely adopted even outside defense. I think that that's the one that has a lot of legs, and so it's certainly one that we're very interested in.
It's cool writing on the wall. And Larry, you obviously had a job in the insurance field. You've probably
Hmm.
sold GRC in the past too, for all I know. I recognize the trends James outlined? Do you think it's in line with what your thoughts are too?
Yeah, absolutely. And then on the insurance side, it's really funny. When I started at DataStream and started going to events, it was definitely eye-opening because when I first started doing this, and this is back in say 2021, I believe, man, MSPs were just like, we don't want to talk to you. Cyber insurance is the enemy. And it was really interesting over the next 6 months to a year because I kept trying to say, hold on, guys, cyber insurance is not the enemy. Cyber insurance is your ally. It's going to help you sell things faster. It's going to help you sell more stuff into your customers. And number two, it ain't going away. It's going to be around for a long time. Look, it started a bit rough because these guys jumped in and just said, hey, here's a new product that we can sell. Talking about the cyber insurers, and they didn't understand the risk that was involved. They didn't understand cybersecurity, but they're getting a hell of a lot smarter about it. They're doing a lot better job. And, I think, the MSPs have now kind of adopted it and said, hey, they were right.
This is
Cyber
yeah.
insurance really is our ally because it's helping us sell. Compliance is the same way,
How
really
much
is.
not brand, I guess educational awareness, like was that a natural thing that just happened in the market, or was there some Larry initiative like, I'm going to start a podcast, I'm going to do XYZ? Like, what do you think helped turn that corner?
Well, I think at first we went out there and we said we're going to just develop the brand. But then when I came back after the first couple of shows, I said, oh, we got a lot more work to do besides developing a brand. We've got to educate on cyber insurance, and we've got to help change the perception that cyber insurance is the MSP's enemy, because it absolutely is exactly the opposite. It is the ally. So we kind of went back to the ground floor and said, okay, let's educate everyone on cyber insurance. What constitutes a good policy? What is a bad policy? If you've got a rider on your CGL or your business owner's policy, we have to tell you, you don't have cyber insurance because a rider's not going to cover off on anything. And that's what you hear so often, cyber insurance claims getting turned down because they had a rider off of a CGL or a business owner's policy. They didn't have a true standalone cyber insurance policy. So we really had to go back to the ground floor and educate the channel. And we weren't the only player out there. There's some other fantastic players. I say we. DataStream was not the only player at the time. There's many other players out there right now, and all of them, I think, collectively have done a really good job in educating the channel on the benefits to cyber insurance. And I think everybody has taken note. They now know that cyber insurance is not going away. They're going to have to deal with it, just like they're going to have to deal with compliance.
Yep. We also are noticing, and I guess this kind of segues to the last topic I really want to dive deeper into. This will be, I guess, tying. We've noticed where we work, focusing on, as James said, the really nitty gritty, the internals, right, smoothing the edges and whatnot, with configurations. We also have actually partnered with DataStream and Beltex as our cyber insurance, pass back and forth, because doing this granular pieces and enforcing settings actually does help with that cyber insurance approval, claim process, and whatnot. So tying this all back to going deeper, it seems like the concept of defense in depth is starting to get better understood. So I guess one more call out for discussion on maybe entrepreneurship, maybe not, but we're seeing that MSPs are willing to pay a premium for a platform that is more niche and scoped. They're willing to have that layer of security platform that doesn't handle an EDR, that's a config manager, that's whitelisting, that's also, single bullet for cyber insurance approval. We're finding that the deeper granularities and ability to talk technical, this is actually another thing, I guess more for Larry with the sales process. I've gotten into so many more technical discussions on granularities than I ever did the first year we were selling Senteon. It's insane how much I have to know to keep up with the audience sometimes, because they want to know the ins and outs of these settings. And I'm like, dude, please don't read a 1,500 page PDF. Please don't try to understand this to the nth degree. You need to really just understand, for, in your example, the prioritization, our example, the settings we call out via learning mode, right? So are you seeing a lot more of a technical buyer? Are you seeing defense in depth, being talked about more? What's the trends you have on this side, James?
So I think MSPs traditionally are technical folks. So I think that the sales cycle tends to, you get into the bits and the bytes, and that's just a natural thing. But I definitely will go back to what I said before. It's like understanding the use case is critical. And for us, it's like, how do MSPs make money with us? That's the one thing that, how do they ensure they can get more customers? They keep their churn down. Like that's the use case. That's really the problem we're solving. And then it's like due diligence. Does it do what we say it's going to do? Does it fit the existing tech stack and all that stuff? And certainly, I think that it is a bit of a technical sale. I would say defense in depth. I think really what it comes down to is, this is why this conversation is so relevant. Is I don't think that there's tech silos anymore. It's like Senteon and Cavelo are working together. Why? Because we do two different things and we complement each other. So that synergy and that being part of that ecosystem is really what is the natural progression in the tech stack world. Like the tech stack is becoming more complicated. Customers want to simplify their tech stack. We all know that there's agent fatigue out there. But at the end of the day, it's like you got to make something actionable.
Absolutely.
Putting us together just makes us stronger. And then adding cybersecurity, like Larry said, it's just another tool that they can use. But if you can streamline it, you're better off, right? You actually have a better value proposition to your customers.
Yeah, definitely. And And Larry, wrapping us up here with the last couple minutes, and then we can get to kind of, how to get in touch with us and some upcoming shows. But I'll ask the point question. I wasn't technical coming into Senteon. I've had to have quite the uphill battle to really catch up with all of these thousands of settings we support. My God. But you kind of joke around, right? Hey, I'm here not to get into the technical talk. I'm here to add color and show my experience. How is there a technical barrier or a baseline someone should be if they're looking to join maybe an earlier stage or even a mature security company? How technical would you recommend? Like, is it a big deal? Is it a value add? Where would you kind of sit that?
I think that, depends on the job function that you're going to be filling. Obviously, if you're going to be an engineer or developer,
Oh yeah.
yeah, you're going to
I
have to
guess
be
I'm meaning from the
technical.
sales perspective.
Yeah,
Sorry.
yeah. From the sales perspective, I look, this is one man's opinion, and this is Larry's opinion. This is not Cavello's opinion. It is my opinion. If you find somebody out there that can connect with people and build relationships, it does not matter how technical
I love
you
that.
are.
Yep.
If you can go out there and you can understand that MSP's pain point, and you can listen to them and you can make some suggestions on how you might be able to resolve that pain point, then you're a good salesperson. You don't have to be technical. I'm one of these people. I like to understand the ins and the outs, the bits and the bytes. I like to know how everything works so that when that technical person comes to me and asks something, I don't have to put them off and say, you know what, don't know the answer to that. I will get you the answer a little bit later. I'd prefer to be able to answer it right then and
Yeah.
there. But again, just to go back to what I was saying, find somebody that knows how to connect with people and find somebody that people want to do business with.
And
You
emphasizing
find
just
that,
this
you got it
industry
made.
too. They want to partner and they want to help the vendors be
Yeah.
better vendors if you find the right partner. So I love that sentiment there, and I think it wraps us up to a nice one. So let's talk about getting in touch with us, where you can see us. So Senteon, our upcoming shows. We will be heading back to Vegas, where we last saw you guys. We'll be
Yeah.
over at Kaseya Connect, and that will be at the end of the month. We can hop over to that next slide, producer in the background. Um, we'll be in Kaseya Connect in Vegas next month. There's actually one more that I forgot to mention. We will be doing Central Mafia out in Chicago right before that. And then MSP GeekCon, which, man, I hope that can potentially hop on your agenda, James. That show is one of my personal favorites. And we did talk about CMMC a little bit in here. We aren't going to have a booth, but we are going to attend as guests to check out the CEIC West Conference and see some partners, because just like you guys, a lot of our base that's interested in defense in depth, cybersecurity hardening, and effective prioritization based vulnerability management seems to be coming from the CMMC focused MSPs. So checking that out, I'll give you a relay on if it was valuable or not. But tell us a little bit about Cavello and how to get in touch where you're off to.
Yeah. I'll jump on that one real quick. Sorry about that, James. Yeah, we're still developing our schedule, but I think right now, we've got it pretty well spelled out. We're going to be down here in Dallas in my backyard because that's
Woo.
where I'm at right now, at the Robbins boot camp big seminar, Robbins big seminar, which is 3 or 4 days of just nonstop action from 7:30 a.m. till usually 8, 9 o'clock at night. Then we're going to be at the Exchange Security Show once again in my backyard over here in Frisco, which is a little bit north of Dallas. And then we'll also be at Exchange Fall, which, yeah, it's held in August, but they still call it Exchange Fall. But it'll be out in Colorado, out there outside of Denver at the Gaylord Rockies. And then you never know. You may find us peppered here and there at some other stuff that we add at the last minute.
Hey,
You
I'll
never know.
advocate for that MSP Geek crowd. I'd love to have you guys out there. It's always a fun, very engineer heavy focus. So now, very excited we could do this together. That we could all get together, post pitch it. We'll have to tag Sean Lardo, get him out here and do some more of these. I'd love to kind of do some more technical call outs, a little bit more focused, but kind of
Hmm.
introducing that high level entrepreneurship to business model. I feel was a great introduction, and I hope the audience also took something away from it.
Good
Cool.
stuff.
Thank you guys.
Thanks, Zach.
All right.